Imagine, if you will, two neighbors deciding to finally end a bitter dispute.
Right.
They sit down, they sign a highly detailed, legally binding contract to build a fence in their shared backyard. They shake hands, the ink dries, but there is a massive problem.
A very heavily armed problem.
Exactly. There's a heavily armed third tenant living in a reinforced tent right on the property line. He wasn't invited to the meeting. He absolutely refuses to read the contract, and, he has no intention of moving.
Yeah, which brings us to the reality on the ground today.
Yes, welcome to the Lebanon-Israel border in July 2026. Good morning. You are joining us for a comprehensive, objective assessment of current global events.
Good morning.
In a media environment that's, well, far too often clouded by sensationalism or bias, our commitment to you today is to provide a measured, fact-driven analysis of the forces currently shaping our world. We're approaching this brief with the steady, impartial clarity required for complex geopolitics. Today is the 3rd of July, 2026. The region of focus is the Middle East, specifically Lebanon. And the title of today's deep dive is Lebanon, Israel, and Hezbollah, Peace or Conflict?
And before we begin our analysis, we do need to acknowledge the sponsor of today's briefing, ProWave AI. This deep dive is generated by Stylo News,
which is an AI-powered news application.
Exactly. And to really understand the caliber of what you're listening to, you should know that Stylo News is the consumer version of Stylo Intel Ops.
Oh, the enterprise software.
Yeah, it's a highly sophisticated software platform built specifically for enterprise operations. It's utilized heavily by government, military, and international business sectors. So by utilizing this technology today, we are giving you unique access to the exact same intelligence gathering power and, analytical tools used by global decision makers.
That's incredible because we are looking at a vast and, frankly, often contradictory amount of data today. And the goal here is to just cut through all that noise.
Precisely. Our mission for this deep dive is very clear. We're going to impartially unpack the primary patterns of events that have unfolded over the past 2 weeks regarding the Lebanon-Israel conflict. We'll examine the varying courses of action proposed by key decision makers, and we will analyze social media sentiment to gauge the public pulse.
And we're doing all of this without endorsing any specific political viewpoint.
Absolutely none. Our goal is to present the facts, the perspectives, and the potential trajectories, ensuring you are fully informed on the reality of the situation without, generating unnecessary fear.
Right. So to truly understand the politics being debated right now in the halls of power, we first have to establish the factual timeline on the ground. Because the diplomatic maneuvers we're seeing today, they're a direct reaction to a very harsh military reality.
They are.
Take us through the timeline that brought us to this exact moment in July 2026.
Well, the reality on the ground is stark, and the trajectory has been worsening for months. What we're looking at is a severe escalation of military confrontation that began in early March 2026.
March? Okay.
Yes. And since that time, the conflict has resulted in over 4,230 civilian casualties and massive displacement of populations. This is particularly in southern Lebanon, but it's also deeply affecting northern Israeli border towns.
And there was a diplomatic attempt at a ceasefire, right, sometime in the spring.
Right, in mid-April.
Yeah.
But it fundamentally failed to hold.
And when we say failed to hold, we aren't just talking about, a few isolated skirmishes.
No, not at all. Cross-border strikes have continued unabated, and they have escalated significantly in sophistication. In just the last few weeks, specifically on June 28th and 29th, we've seen targeted, very heavy Israeli military strikes.
And these were aimed at infrastructure, right?
Specifically aimed at destroying Hezbollah tunnel networks and infrastructure in southern Lebanese areas. The strikes heavily concentrated on the Tyre district and the city of Nabatea.
I want to pause on that detail for just a moment, because when we say tunnel networks, I think it's easy to picture, like, a few dirt trenches. But geometrically and militarily, what are we actually talking about in the Tyre district?
That is a crucial distinction. These are not rudimentary dirt trenches. We are talking about highly sophisticated, deeply entrenched, subterranean military infrastructure.
Wow.
Yeah. These networks are often cast in solid concrete. They're equipped with ventilation, communication lines, and extensive storage for munitions.
So they're built to last.
Built to last, and built to allow a paramilitary force to move equipment and personnel completely undetected by aerial surveillance, and to survive heavy bombardment. So when Israel conducts operations to destroy them, it requires significant earth-penetrating ordnance. The military reality on the border is one of ongoing, highly active hostilities involving advanced weaponry.
Which makes the diplomatic timeline so jarring. I mean, right in the middle of this active fighting, while concrete tunnels are being bombed in Nabashia, a major diplomatic event occurred on the exact other side of the world.
Yes, on June 26, 2026.
Right, a U.S.-brokered trilateral security framework agreement was signed in Washington.
It was, and it is a highly mechanical agreement. Yeah. It's designed to fundamentally alter the security architecture of southern Lebanon. The key provisions of this June 26 framework, they revolve around the creation of what the text calls demilitarized pilot zones.
Okay, let's unpack this, because pilot zones sounds a bit like, I don't know, corporate jargon. What does that actually mean in an active war zone?
Well, in practice, it means carving out specific geographic areas where absolutely no unauthorized military presence is allowed.
Okay.
The framework dictates a gradual, phased withdrawal of Israeli military forces from these southern areas. And in their place, the Lebanese National Army is mandated to deploy south of the Litani River to secure the border.
The Litani River, that comes up constantly in these briefings. Geographically, why is that the magic line?
The Litani River runs roughly east to west, about 18 miles north of the Israel-Lebanon border. Historically and strategically, pushing non-state forces north of the Litani creates a physical buffer zone.
I see.
It essentially places northern Israeli civilian centers largely out of range of short-range anti-tank missiles and unguided rockets. But the most critical and undeniably the most contentious provision of the June 26 agreement is the mandated disarmament of non-state armed groups operating in that region.
Specifically Hezbollah.
Specifically Hezbollah.
And this is where I have to bring us back to that backyard fence analogy I mentioned earlier. Hold on. The Lebanese army disarming Hezbollah. From what I understand of their respective military capabilities, isn't that essentially asking a local, underfunded police force to disarm a highly trained, deeply entrenched, heavily armed paramilitary group?
That's exactly the concern.
How can this diplomatic agreement functionally be implemented when the primary military target on the ground, Hezbollah, wasn't even at the table to sign it?
You have identified the exact structural vulnerability of the framework. I mean, you have a diplomatic agreement signed by state actors, Lebanon and Israel, brokered by the United States. But the entity required to make the largest operational concession, which is total disarmament south of the Litani, is a non-state actor that fundamentally rejects the authority of the agreement.
Right.
It creates a massive vacuum between diplomatic intent and military reality. The state actors are attempting to legislate a reality that neither of them currently has the physical monopoly on force to actually implement.
And because of that vacuum, every single decision maker is forced into a completely different corner.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is how these key players actually view this June 26 agreement, because the courses of action they are pursuing are starkly different.
Let's start with the Lebanese government.
Okay, so President Joseph Aoun and Prime Minister Nawaf Salam, they view this agreement as a historic, absolute necessity. From their perspective, this is the only viable step to restore national sovereignty and foreign military interference on their soil, and crucially, stop the mounting civilian casualties.
But they are walking an incredibly narrow tightrope, aren't they?
Oh, tightrope is an understatement. They desperately need these pilot zones to work to satisfy the international community and halt Israeli incursions, but they face massive internal hurdles.
Because of the disarmament clause?
Yes. Ordering the Lebanese army to forcefully implement the disarmament of Hezbollah carries a profound, immediate risk of sparking a civil war or widespread internal unrest within Lebanon itself. They are trying to secure peace with a neighbor while desperately avoiding a war at home.
Yeah, that's an incredibly fragile position. And looking at it objectively from the Israeli government's stance, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yisrael Katz. Israel signed the framework, and they publicly support it as a mechanism to secure their northern borders so their displaced citizens can return home.
Right.
But their course of action clearly shows they are not relying solely on the paper it's written on.
Not at all. Israel insists on maintaining a military presence and conducting active, preemptive operations, like the destruction of the tunnel networks we saw on June 28 and 29, until Hezbollah is fully, verifiably disarmed. Israel's perspective is that diplomatic agreements in this region only hold weight if they are backed by continuous, undeniable military pressure.
Which brings us to Hezbollah's stance, articulated by their deputy leader, Naim Qassem.
Hezbollah completely and unequivocally rejects the June 26 agreement. They label it a humiliating surrender and a betrayal of Lebanese sovereignty. They absolutely refuse to disarm or retreat north of the Litani River.
So no concessions on their end?
None. Their position is that Israel must unconditionally withdraw from Lebanese territory, and they assert their ongoing sovereign right to armed resistance. They view the recent Israeli strikes on their tunnel networks not as the enforcement of a peace deal, but as blatant acts of aggression that they have the right to retaliate against.
You know, if you're looking at this from the outside, you might be wondering why a signed peace treaty doesn't just equal peace. This is why. It is a fundamental gridlock. Diplomacy demands disarmament as the absolute precondition for peace, but Hezbollah demands armed resistance as the absolute precondition for sovereignty.
Yes,
The two core demands are just mechanically mutually exclusive.
they are. And to fully grasp the severity of this, we have to recognize that this local gridlock cannot be understood in isolation. Hezbollah's refusal to disarm isn't happening in a vacuum. They receive significant backing, funding, and strategic direction from Iran.
Exactly. You cannot understand the Lebanon-Israel border right now without zooming out to the broader geopolitical chessboard. Let's look at the massive negotiation happening right now in Switzerland.
Right, because the conflict in Lebanon is deeply, inextricably intertwined with parallel negotiations happening between the United States and Iran in Geneva. The U.S. and Iran have been quietly attempting to draft a memorandum of understanding aimed at freezing conflict zones across the entire Middle East.
A huge undertaking.
Massive. And as part of that effort, a deconfliction cell was recently created in Geneva. It involves representatives from the U.S., Iran, Lebanon, Qatar, and Pakistan.
Wait, I need to stop you there. A deconfliction cell sounds incredibly bureaucratic. What does that actually look like in practice? Is it a literal room with, like, a red phone on a desk in Geneva?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
It is a dedicated communication channel, often an actual secure room staffed by intelligence and military liaisons from the participating countries.
Okay.
The sole purpose of a deconfliction cell is to share real-time information to prevent accidental escalations. If one country is moving assets or planning a strike, they notify the cell so the other countries know it's a limited operation, not the start of a total war.
But notably, looking at the list of countries you just named, Israel was excluded from this specific Geneva deconfliction cell.
There were.
So it's like organizing a neighborhood watch meeting to stop burglaries, but intentionally not inviting the guy whose house keeps getting robbed.
That is exactly how critics of the cell view it. Iran essentially views the U.S.-brokered trilateral deal in Washington, the one regarding Lebanon and Israel, as a direct threat to its regional influence.
Because it bypasses the Geneva room.
Yes, Tehran sees the Washington Agreement as the U.S. trying to bypass the broader Geneva understandings and systematically dismantle Iran's forward defense strategy, a strategy which, relies heavily on a well-armed Hezbollah.
Yes. An agreement negotiated in an air-conditioned room in Switzerland to fix a tunnel war in the Middle East. What could possibly go wrong? And we are already seeing how those tensions are spilling over far beyond the Mediterranean coast.
We are. The rhetoric and the kinetic military actions are expanding rapidly. Iran has issued direct public threats to retaliate if Israel launches a full-scale attack on Hezbollah's primary stronghold in the Dahiyah district of southern Beirut.
Wow.
Furthermore, this tension is spilling into global shipping lanes. Following a recent drone attack on a commercial oil tanker in the Strait of Hormuz, the United States actually launched targeted strikes on Iranian military infrastructure.
And for anyone wondering why the Strait of Hormuz matters to a border dispute in Lebanon, it's because roughly 20% of the world's total global oil consumption passes through that narrow waterway. If that strait closes, global markets panic and energy prices skyrocket everywhere.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the international community is reacting to this rapid expansion of tension with visible alarm. We're seeing Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, publicly welcoming the Israel-Lebanon peace deal, urging all parties to prioritize disarmament to stabilize the region.
All right.
Meanwhile, regional neighbors like Jordan are urgently sending heavy airlifts of humanitarian aid directly into Lebanon.
That Jordanian aid flight really emphasizes the global anxiety. If we connect this to the bigger picture, global decision makers are not treating the Lebanon border as just a localized territorial dispute. They are treating it as a critical pressure valve for the entire Middle East.
Exactly.
If the Washington Framework Agreement completely collapses, or if the U.S.-Iran talks in Switzerland break down, the localized violence in southern Lebanon could easily serve as the spark that ignites multiple dormant fronts across the region.
That is the overarching fear driving the diplomatic urgency right now.
So we've walked through the halls of power, the diplomatic suites in Washington, and the deconfliction cells in Geneva. But to get a complete, holistic intelligence picture, we have to transition from the geopolitical elite to the digital streets.
We do.
We need to look at how the public is reacting to these highly volatile 2 weeks. And to do this, we are relying on Stylo News' advanced sentiment tracking across X, the platform formerly known as Twitter.
And it is crucial to state clearly here, as analysts, we are delivering an objective summary of highly polarized digital sentiment. We do not endorse any of these viewpoints.
Right, absolute.
Our role is merely to report your data to show you the psychological landscape of the global public.
Well, when you look at the hashtags, hashtag Lebanon and hashtag Beirut, the data shows a landscape that is predominantly anxious, deeply empathetic, and fearful. Users across the globe are expressing profound outrage over the realities of the ground war. They're sharing images and stories of the mass civilian casualties, the burning of ancestral homes, and the massive displacement of families.
There is also a palpable, overwhelming fear among these users of a looming civil war or a permanent internal fracture within Lebanese society. The tragedy of the humanitarian crisis and the desire to protect non-combatants is really the one area of broad digital consensus.
However, when the Stylo News algorithms isolate hashtags like hashtag Hezbollah and hashtag Israel, that consensus just shatters into a deeply polarized ideological split.
Yes, it completely diverges.
On one side, pro-Israel users strongly condemn Hezbollah. They label the group as a radical Iranian proxy force that continually violates sovereign borders and past ceasefires. They frequently cite international law, specifically Article 51 of the UN Charter, to justify ongoing Israeli military strikes.
If I may briefly clarify for our listeners, Article 51 of the UN Charter is the provision that guarantees the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations.
Right.
So pro-Israel users argue that because Hezbollah continuously fires rockets into Israeli territory, Israel has a legal mandate under Article 51 to strike back and dismantle the aggressor's infrastructure, regardless of what diplomatic agreements are being signed.
Conversely, when we analyze pro-resistance and anti-Israel users, the narrative is completely inverted. These users vehemently condemn Israel for what they describe as relentless aggression, illegal invasions of sovereign territory, and disproportionate civilian harm.
Very different perspective.
In this digital camp, Hezbollah is not viewed as a proxy, but is widely defended as a legitimate, necessary resistance force protecting Lebanese sovereignty against foreign occupation.
And from that perspective, they view the U.S. brokered agreement not as a pathway to peace, but as an externally imposed subjugation designed to strip Lebanon of its only effective defense mechanism.
What's incredible to me is that the digital sentiment perfectly mirrors the physical gridlock we discussed earlier. There is a universal, broad consensus on the tragedy of civilian suffering, but there are entirely fractured, diametrically opposed views on the root cause, who is ultimately to blame, and what constitutes a legitimate course of action moving forward.
That polarization is exactly why the situation on the ground is so incredibly volatile. When public sentiment is entirely divided on the fundamental facts of who the aggressor is, it provides deep political cover for leaders on all sides to maintain uncompromising maximalist positions.
Which brings us to the final objective of today's deep dive. We've analyzed the past 2 weeks. We've dissected the diplomatic texts, the military realities, and the public sentiment. Now, we need to forecast. We need to provide you with an intelligence briefing on the most likely upcoming events. What are the specific flashpoints you need to be watching for in the coming days and weeks?
Based on the data, there are 3 primary indicators we are monitoring very closely.
Okay, what's number 1?
Number 1 is the Lebanese army's attempt to actually implement those pilot zones south of the Litani River. Day 1 of this operation is critical. You must watch whether the Lebanese military's movement into these areas goes smoothly, or whether it sparks internal civil conflict or direct armed clashes with Hezbollah forces who flatly refuse to vacate their positions.
Because if the Lebanese army cannot secure the zone, the Washington agreement is effectively dead on arrival.
Exactly. That is the ultimate test of its viability. Number 2, you must watch for potential military retaliation from Hezbollah.
Following the tunnel strikes.
Yes. Following the June 28 and 29 Israeli operations that destroyed extensive tunnel networks in Nabatea and Tyre, Hezbollah explicitly and publicly reserved the right to respond. A significant mass casualty retaliatory strike into Israeli territory could immediately nullify any remaining diplomatic goodwill and trigger a massive, overwhelming Israeli counteroffensive.
And the third flashpoint.
The third indicator is the progress or potential collapse of the parallel U.S.-Iran negotiations happening in Switzerland. The Middle East is a deeply interconnected system. If those talks fail, Iran may incentivize Hezbollah to rapidly escalate the conflict in Lebanon to apply maximum pressure on both the United States and Israel.
But if they succeed?
Conversely, if a quiet understanding is reached in Switzerland, it could drain the political and financial support required to sustain the high-intensity conflict in the Levant.
There is also a massive humanitarian variable here that we just cannot overlook.
Indeed. I would strongly warn our listeners to watch how international aid organizations navigate this environment. They are currently attempting to provide urgent food, medicine, and shelter to over 1 million displaced people.
Right.
But they are operating inside a highly contested, fragile security environment where the rules of engagement literally change daily, and safe corridors can become combat zones in a matter of hours.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final, overarching thought. Something to mull over as you watch the news unfold this week, keeping in mind the vast disconnect between the halls of power and the reality on the ground.
Consider this. What happens to a nation's stability when the timeline of international diplomacy moves at a fundamentally different speed than the timeline of military reality? You have treaties being painstakingly negotiated over months in air-conditioned rooms in Washington and Geneva, debating the exact phrasing of pilot zones. Meanwhile, tunnel networks are being destroyed, and missiles are being launched in real time today in the Tyre district. When the speed of diplomacy cannot catch up to the speed of war, the civilian population is left trapped in the devastating vacuum in between.
It's a deeply sobering reality, and it is exactly why staying objectively informed is so critical. We want to thank ProWave AI for making this deep dive possible. If you want to cut through the sensationalist noise and get this level of clear, unbiased intelligence on the topics that actually matter to you, you need to check out Stylo News. Stylo News is available right now as a mobile and computer app. It allows you, as an individual, to customize personal intelligence-style briefs exactly like the one you heard today. The AI securely pulls from hundreds of verified traditional news sources and real-time data from X to give you a complete 360-degree picture. Don't rely on algorithms designed to outrage you. Rely on intelligence designed to inform you. You can subscribe right now for AI-powered news on demand at www.stylonews.com.
We really appreciate you joining us as the third person in this complex conversation today.
We really do. Thank you for spending your time with us. We invite you to request specific topics, regions, or global events for our future deep dives. Follow Stylo News on your favorite social media platforms to let us know what you want us to unpack next. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and have a great day.